The morning mist clung to the ancient pine trees surrounding the Silvermoon Pack territory like ghostly fingers, and Arya Moonwhisper wished she could disappear into it just as easily. She pressed her back against the rough bark of an oak tree, trying to make herself invisible as the other pack members gathered in the central clearing for the morning announcements. "There she is," sneered Cassandra, the beta's daughter, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at Arya's hiding spot. The pack's little disgrace. Arya's heart sank as several pack members turned to look at her, with expressions ranging from pity to outright disgust. At 19, she should have shifted years ago, should have found her wolf and her place in the pack hierarchy. Instead, she remained stubbornly human, earning her the cruel nickname the Broken Omega. "Arya, come here," called Alpha Marcus, his voice carrying the authority that made even the strongest wolves bow their heads. There was no warmth in his tone, only the resigned duty of a leader dealing with his pack's greatest disappointment. She stepped forward on trembling legs, acutely aware of how small and fragile she looked among the towering werewolves. The other Omegas at least had their wolves, had found mates or useful roles within the pack structure. Arya had nothing but her stubborn determination to prove she belonged somewhere. "As you all know," Alpha Marcus began, his steel-grey eyes scanning the assembled pack, "Alpha King Darius will arrive tomorrow to choose a mate from our eligible females." Excited whispers rippled through the crowd, especially among the unmated she-wolves. "This is a tremendous honor for our pack, and I expect everyone to be on their best behavior." Cassandra preened, tossing her golden hair over her shoulder. "Obviously, he'll choose me," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm the strongest female warrior in the pack, and my bloodline is impeccable." "The ceremony will take place tomorrow evening," Alpha Marcus continued. "All unmated females between 18 and 25 will present themselves." His gaze briefly flickered to Arya, and she saw the moment he dismissed her as irrelevant. "Arya, you'll help with the preparations. Kitchen duty." The dismissal stung, but Arya had learned long ago not to show her pain in public. She nodded silently, ignoring the snickers from the younger pack members and the pitying looks from some of the elder females. As the crowd dispersed, Arya's best friend Elena approached, her kind brown eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Arya. That wasn't fair." "It's fine," Arya lied, forcing a smile. "I wouldn't want to meet the Alpha King anyway. Can you imagine? He'd probably take one look at me and laugh." But even as she spoke the words, something deep inside her chest stirred, a feeling she couldn't name, like a sleeping creature beginning to wake. She pressed her hand to her heart, confused by the sudden warmth spreading through her veins. That night, Arya lay in her small room in the packhouse's servants' quarters, staring up at the full moon through her tiny window. The moonlight seemed brighter than usual, almost calling to her. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and whispered a prayer to the moon goddess that had never answered her before. "Please," she breathed into the silver light, "just give me a chance to prove I'm worth something." The moon seemed to pulse in response, and for a moment Arya could have sworn she heard a gentle voice carried on the night wind. "Soon, my child, your time approaches." Chapter 2. The Alpha King arrives. The Silvermoon Pack territory buzzed with nervous energy as the Alpha King's convoy approached. Arya had spent the entire morning helping to prepare the Great Hall, hanging garlands of silver flowers and polishing the ancient wooden tables until they gleamed. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, but she didn't complain. She was grateful to be useful, even if it meant staying in the background. "Arya, stop daydreaming and help me with these decorations," snapped Cassandra, who had appointed herself the unofficial supervisor of the preparations. She wore a flowing blue dress that complemented her eyes, and her hair was styled in elaborate braids woven with silver threads. Every inch of her screamed, "Future Lunar Queen." "Yes, Cassandra," Arya replied quietly, reaching for another garland. As she stretched up to hang it, her worn sleeve caught on a nail and tore, revealing a pale shoulder marked with what looked like a strange birthmark, or perhaps a scar, shaped like a crescent moon. "Cover that up," Cassandra hissed, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the mark. "It's disgusting. No one wants to see your deformities during such an important occasion." Arya quickly pulled her sleeve back into place, her cheeks burning with humiliation. The mark had appeared on her 16th birthday, and the pack healer had examined it with confusion, unable to explain its origin or meaning. Most pack members assumed it was just another sign of how broken she was. The sound of approaching horses silenced the chatter in the great hall. Through the tall windows, Arya could see the royal convoy. magnificent black stallions carrying riders in gleaming armor, banners bearing the royal crest of a silver wolf beneath a crown of stars fluttering in the breeze. Alpha Marcus strode into the hall, his mate Luna Sera beside him, both dressed in their finest ceremonial robes. "Places, everyone," he commanded. "The eligible females will stand in the center. Everyone else, form a respectful circle around them." Arya began to move toward the edge of the room with the other servants, but Elena caught her arm. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "You're 19 and unmated. Technically, you should be with us." "Don't be ridiculous," Arya protested. "I don't even have a wolf. I can't possibly—" "The Alpha said all unmated females," Elena insisted, her voice firm. "That includes you." Before Arya could argue further, the great doors swung open with a resounding boom. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as an overwhelming presence filled the space, making every wolf present instinctively bare their necks in submission. Alpha King Darius stepped through the threshold, and Arya's breath caught in her throat. He was magnificent, tall and broad-shouldered, with coal-black hair and piercing silver eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and his very presence commanded absolute authority. He wore black leather and silver armor that emphasized his warrior's build, and a crown of twisted silver sat upon his brow. But it wasn't his physical presence that made Arya's knees weak. It was the way his scent hit her like a physical blow. Pine and rain, and something wild and untamed that made every cell in her body sing with recognition. Mate. The word whispered through her mind with such certainty that she staggered, Elena's steadying hand on her arm the only thing keeping her upright. This couldn't be happening. She was nobody, nothing. A broken Omega who couldn't even shift. Alpha King Darius's silver eyes swept across the assembled females, pausing briefly on Cassandra, who straightened proudly under his gaze. But then his eyes continued their journey, and when they landed on Arya, the world stopped. Time seemed suspended as their gazes locked. She saw his eyes widen slightly, saw his nostrils flare as he caught her scent across the room. The mate bond snapped into place between them like a golden thread, binding their souls together with an intensity that made Arya gasp aloud. "You," he said, his deep voice carrying easily across the silent hall. Every head turned to see who had captured the Alpha King's attention, and Arya heard the collective gasp as they realized he was looking at her. "That's impossible," Cassandra breathed, her face pale with shock and growing anger. Alpha King Darius began walking toward Arya, his silver eyes never leaving hers. With each step, the mate bond grew stronger, pulling at something deep in her chest that had been sleeping all her life. "What is your name?" he asked when he stood before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his powerful frame. Arya," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Arya Moon Whisper." He reached out slowly, as if approaching a frightened deer, and gently touched the sleeve where her birthmark lay hidden. The moment his fingers made contact with the fabric, a shock of electricity shot through both of them, and Arya's birthmark began to glow with silver light, visible even through her sleeve. "Impossible," Alpha Marcus breathed from across the room. Alpha King Darius's eyes widened as understanding dawned on his face. "Show me," he commanded softly, but his voice held the unmistakable tone of an alpha who expected to be obeyed. With trembling fingers, Arya pulled back her sleeve, revealing the crescent moon mark that now pulsed with ethereal silver light. The moment the moonlight from the windows touched it, something inside Arya exploded to life. Power, ancient, overwhelming, and utterly foreign, surged through her veins like liquid starlight. She cried out as her body began to change, bones shifting and lengthening, muscles expanding with newfound strength. For the first time in her life, Arya Moon Whisper was shifting, but this wasn't the shift of an ordinary Omega. Silver light poured from her skin as she transformed, and when the light faded, a magnificent wolf with fur like spun moonlight and eyes like liquid silver stood where the broken girl had been moments before. The great hall fell into absolute silence, broken only by Alpha King Darius's reverent whisper. The Moon Wolf. The legends were true. Chapter 3. The Moon Wolf's Awakening. The silence in the great hall stretched for what felt like eternity. Arya stood frozen in her magnificent wolf form, silver fur rippling with otherworldly light, as every pair of eyes in the room stared at her in stunned disbelief. She could feel the power coursing through her veins like molten silver, ancient and overwhelming, making her want to howl at the moon that had finally answered her prayers. Alpha King Darius was the first to move, dropping to one knee before her, a gesture that sent shockwaves through the assembled pack. An Alpha King bowed to no one, yet here he was, showing reverence to the girl they had all dismissed as worthless. "My queen," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and something deeper, a recognition that went beyond the mate bond. "The prophecies spoke of your return." Arya tried to shift back to human form, but the power was too new, too overwhelming. She whimpered softly, her silver eyes pleading for help, and Darius immediately understood. He approached slowly, his hands outstretched in a gesture of peace and support. "Easy," he murmured, his voice taking on the gentle tone one might use with a frightened animal. "You're safe. I'm here." The moment his hands touched her silver fur, warmth flooded through Arya's body, and she felt the chaotic power settle into something more manageable. The shift back to human form was smoother this time, leaving her standing naked and trembling before the entire pack. Darius immediately shrugged off his ceremonial cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders, his protective instincts flaring. The rich fabric engulfed her small frame, but it carried his scent, pine and rain and wild storms, which helped ground her spinning world. "This is impossible," Alpha Marcus sputtered, finally finding his voice. His face was pale with shock and something that looked suspiciously like fear. "She's just a broken Omega. She can't be—" "She is exactly what the prophecies foretold," Darius interrupted, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of royalty. His silver eyes hardened as he looked at the Silver Moon Pack's leadership. "The Moon Wolf, daughter of the Moon Goddess herself, returned to us in our darkest hour." Cassandra let out a strangled sound of rage and disbelief. "No, this can't be happening. I'm supposed to be your mate, my bloodline, my strength." "Your bloodline means nothing compared to divine heritage," Darius replied coldly, not even bothering to look at the Beta's daughter. His attention remained focused entirely on Arya, who was still trying to process what had just happened to her. Elder Moonwhisper, the pack's oldest member and Arya's distant relative, suddenly stepped forward from the crowd. His ancient face was creased with wonder and something that might have been guilt. "I should have known," he whispered, his rheumy eyes fixed on Arya's still glowing birthmark. "The signs were all there. Your mother. She came to us during a lunar eclipse, heavily pregnant and fleeing something terrible. She died giving birth to you, but not before she made me promise to keep you safe until your time came." Arya's legs nearly gave out. "My mother? But you always said she was just a rogue who died in childbirth." "I lied to protect you," Elder Moonwhisper admitted, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "She told me terrible forces would seek to destroy you if they knew what you were. I thought if you never shifted, if you remained hidden among us as a powerless Omega, you might be safe." Darius's jaw clenched as understanding dawned on his face. "The Shadow Court," he growled, the name carrying so much venom that several pack members stepped back instinctively. "They've been hunting the Moonwolf bloodline for centuries, destroying anyone who might carry the goddess's power." "Who are the Shadow Court?" Arya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything she thought she knew about her life was crumbling around her, replaced by a destiny she never asked for. "Dark Wolves," Darius explained, his protective instincts making him step closer to her. "They rejected the Moon Goddess centuries ago and chose to serve darker powers. They believe that by consuming the Moon Wolf's power, they can overthrow the natural order and rule over all supernatural beings." Lunacera, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "If what you're saying is true, then Arya is in terrible danger. The Shadow Court will sense her awakening." As if summoned by her words, a bone-chilling howl echoed across the territory, followed by another and another. The sound was wrong somehow, tainted with malice and unnatural hunger that made every wolf present flatten their ears in instinctive terror. "They're already here," Darius snarled, his own power flaring in response to the threat. "Marcus, get your pack to safety. Now." But even as he gave the order, shadows began seeping through the walls of the great hall like smoke, coalescing into forms that were almost wolf-like but fundamentally wrong. Their eyes burned with red fire, and their fur was the color of midnight, shot through with veins of sickly green. "Well, well," purred a voice like poisoned honey as the largest shadow wolf materialized fully. It was massive, easily twice the size of a normal alpha, with scars crisscrossing its dark hide and fangs that dripped with black venom. The little moon wolf has finally awakened. How convenient. Darius immediately shifted, his own wolf form impressive and powerful, placing himself between Arya and the shadow creature. His midnight black fur bristled with barely contained rage, and his silver eyes promised death to anyone who threatened his mate. "Malakar," he growled, recognizing the shadow wolf. "I should have known you'd be the first to crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in." "Oh, Darius," Malakar laughed, the sound sending chills down every spine in the room. "Did you really think you could hide her from us forever?" The moment her power awakened, every shadow servant across the realm felt it. "She belongs to us now." "Over my dead body," Darius snarled, preparing to attack. "That," Malakar replied with obvious pleasure, "can certainly be arranged." Chapter 4. First Battle. The great hall erupted into chaos as Malakar's shadow wolves poured through the walls like a dark tide. Arya found herself pressed against the far wall, still wrapped in Darius's cloak, as the Silver Moon Pack warriors shifted and prepared to defend their territory. But she could see immediately that they were outmatched. The shadow wolves moved with unnatural speed and strength, their red eyes blazing with malevolent intelligence. When the pack warriors' claws and fangs made contact with shadow flesh, their attacks seemed to pass through harmlessly, while the shadow wolves' strikes left very real wounds. "They're not entirely corporeal," Elder Moonwhisper shouted over the sounds of battle, his voice strained with effort as he cast some kind of protective ward around the non-combatants. "Physical attacks alone won't stop them." Darius was locked in combat with Malakar, their battle shaking the very foundations of the building. The Alpha King was a formidable warrior, his movements fluid and deadly, but even he was struggling against the Shadow Lord's unnatural abilities. Arya watched in horror as Cassandra, despite her earlier hostility, threw herself between a shadow wolf and a group of younger pack members. The creature's claws raked across her side, sending her crashing into a wooden pillar with a sickening thud. "No!" Arya cried out, something deep inside her responding to the sight of her pack members, her people, regardless of how they'd treated her, being hurt. The power that had awakened when she first shifted surged through her again, but this time it felt different, focused, angry. Silver light began to pour from her skin, growing brighter and brighter until it illuminated the entire hall. The shadow wolves hissed and recoiled from the radiance, their forms becoming less solid, more transparent. "That's it!" Elder Moonwhisper called out, his voice filled with hope. "Arya, your light! It's their weakness!" But Arya had no idea how to control the power flowing through her. It felt like trying to direct a raging river with her bare hands. Every time she tried to focus it, it either faded to nothing or exploded outward in wild, uncontrolled bursts. Malakar noticed her struggle and laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the silver light. "Poor little moon wolf," he taunted, even as he continued his deadly dance with Darius. "All that power, and no idea how to use it. You're as helpless as you ever were." His words stung because they held a grain of truth. Arya had spent her entire life being told she was powerless, and now, when her pack needed her most, she still felt helpless in a different way. "You are not helpless, daughter." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, warm and comforting like moonlight on water. Arya gasped as she felt a presence settle around her like a protective embrace, ancient, loving, and infinitely powerful. "I am here, as I have always been. You need only remember who you are." Suddenly, knowledge flooded Arya's mind. Not just information, but understanding. The kind of deep, intuitive wisdom that comes from divine heritage. She saw flashes of the past. Her mother, a radiant woman with silver eyes identical to her own, wielding moonlight like a weapon against creatures of darkness. She saw the first moon wolf, blessed by the goddess herself, to be a guardian between the mortal and divine realms. And she understood what she needed to do. Arya stepped forward, no longer afraid, her bare feet glowing with silver fire as they touched the stone floor. "Malakar," she called out, her voice carrying a new authority that made even the Shadow Lord pause his attack on Darius. "Yes, little wolf," he sneered, turning his burning red eyes toward her. "You're trespassing," she said simply, and raised her hand. What emerged wasn't the wild, uncontrolled burst of power from before. This was precise, focused, and utterly devastating. A beam of pure moonlight lanced from her palm, striking Malakar directly in the chest. The Shadow Lord's scream of pain and rage shook the entire building. Where the light touched him, his form began to dissolve, the dark magic that held him together unraveling like a poorly woven tapestry. "This isn't over," he howled as his body discorporated. "The Shadow Court knows where you are now. We will never stop hunting you." "Let them come," Arya replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion she could feel creeping in at the edges. "I'll be ready." The remaining Shadow Wolves fled as their master's presence faded, melting back into the darkness from whence they came. The great hall fell silent except for the labored breathing of the wounded and the soft crackling of silver fire that still danced around Arya's form. Darius shifted back to human form, his chest heaving from exertion, several deep gashes marking his torso where Malakar's claws had found their mark. But his silver eyes were bright with pride, and something deeper as he looked at his mate. "You were magnificent," he breathed, moving toward her. Arya swayed on her feet, the adrenaline of battle finally fading and leaving her drained. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "An hour ago I couldn't even shift, and now you've just driven off one of the most powerful Shadow Lords in existence," Darius finished for her, catching her as her knees buckled. "But he was right about one thing. They know where you are now. It's not safe for you to stay here." Alpha Marcus, who had remained conspicuously absent from the actual fighting, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Arya comes with me to the capital," Darius replied firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "She needs proper training to control her abilities, and she needs the protection that only the Royal Guard can provide." "But she's part of our pack," Lunacera began. "She's the Moonwolf," Darius interrupted, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an Alpha King. "Her destiny is bigger than any single pack. Besides," he added, his expression softening as he looked down at Arya, "she's my mate. Where I go, she goes." Arya looked around the great hall, taking in the faces of the pack members who had dismissed and tormented her for so long. Some looked guilty, others resentful, and a few, like Elena and Elder Moonwhisper, gazed at her with love and pride. "Will I be able to come back?" she asked quietly. "Of course," Darius assured her. "This will always be your home if you want it to be. But first we need to keep you alive long enough to master your gifts." As if to emphasize his point, another distant howl echoed across the territory, closer this time, and definitely not alone. "We need to leave," Darius said urgently. "Now." Arya nodded, understanding that her old life was truly over. The broken little Omega was gone, replaced by something she was still struggling to comprehend. As Darius swept her up in his arms, carrying her toward an uncertain but undeniably dangerous future, she couldn't help but wonder if she was strong enough for what lay ahead. The moon goddess's voice whispered through her mind one last time, "You are stronger than you know, daughter. Trust in yourself, and in the bond that ties you to your king. Together you will face the darkness and emerge victorious." Arya could only hope the goddess was right. Chapter 5. The Journey to Lunaris. The royal carriage thundered through the moonlit forest, its enchanted wheels barely making a sound on the ancient stone road that led to the capital city of Lunaris. Arya sat across from Darius, wrapped in a borrowed dress from Lunacera that was still too big for her small frame, trying to process everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. She was no longer the unwanted Omega of the Silvermoon pack. She was the Moonwolf, mate to the Alpha King and apparently the target of every dark force in the supernatural realm. The transition felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. "Oh, you're trembling," Darius observed, his silver eyes studying her with concern. Even in the dim light of the carriage lanterns, he was devastatingly handsome, and the mate bond hummed between them like a living thing, making her hyper-aware of his every movement. "I'm fine," Arya replied automatically, then caught herself. "Actually, no, I'm terrified. This morning I was scrubbing floors and being called worthless, and now you're telling me I'm some kind of prophesied savior. It's a lot to take in." Darius leaned forward, his large hands gently covering her smaller ones. The contact sent warmth shooting up her arms, and she had to resist the urge to lean into his strength. "I know this is overwhelming," he said softly. "I wish we had more time for you to adjust gradually, but the Shadow Court won't give us that luxury." "Tell me about them," Arya requested, grateful for a distraction from the confusing feelings swirling inside her. "Elder Moonwhisper mentioned they've been hunting my bloodline for centuries, but I don't understand why." Darius's expression darkened and he settled back into his seat, before beginning his explanation. Long ago, all wolves served the moon goddess. She blessed certain bloodlines with special abilities to help protect the balance between light and dark. Your ancestors, the moon wolves, were her most trusted guardians. He paused as the carriage hit a bump in the road, his protective instincts flaring as he steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm. But some wolves grew jealous of the moon wolves' power and favor. They turned to darker sources of magic, shadow gods who promised them strength beyond anything the moon goddess offered. And the price? Arya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Their souls, their connection to the natural world, their ability to feel genuine emotions like love and compassion. They became the Shadow Court, powerful but empty, sustained only by their hunger for more power and their hatred of everything the moon goddess represents. Arya shuddered, remembering Malakar's burning red eyes and the wrongness that had radiated from him. And they want to kill me because your power comes directly from the moon goddess herself. If they can consume it, corrupt it, they believe they can break her hold on our world entirely. Every moonwolf who has ever lived has been hunted by them, and until tonight, they had succeeded in wiping out the bloodline completely. The weight of that responsibility settled on Arya's shoulders like a lead blanket. So if I fail, if they get me, they won't, Darius said with such fierce certainty that it took her breath away. I won't let them. The Royal Guard won't let them. And most importantly, you won't let them. What you did back there, channeling pure moonlight to banish Malakar, most trained warriors couldn't accomplish something like that. But I don't know how I did it, Arya protested. It felt like someone else was guiding my actions. What if next time the moon goddess was guiding you? Darius interrupted gently. That's what the legends say happens when a moon wolf first awakens. She helps them until they learn to channel their power independently. Before Arya could respond, the carriage suddenly lurched to a halt. Darius was instantly alert, his hand moving to the silver sword at his side. Stay behind me, he commanded, his voice taking on the authority of an alpha king. The carriage door opened, and Captain Thorne, the head of Darius's royal guard, peered inside. His weathered face was grim with concern. Your Majesty, we have a problem. The bridge across Moonfall River has been destroyed. Recent damage, shadow magic residue all over the stone. Darius cursed under his breath. They're trying to slow us down, force us to take the longer route through Darkwood Forest. He looked at Arya, his expression torn between protectiveness and pragmatism. The forest route will add 2 days to our journey, and it's far more dangerous. But the alternative is trying to ford the river, which is too risky in your condition. What condition? Arya asked, confused. You're exhausted, Darius explained patiently. Using that much power when you're untrained takes a tremendous toll. You need rest, food, and time to recover before we encounter any more shadow creatures. As if to prove his point, Arya suddenly felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She hadn't realized how drained she was until he mentioned it, but now she could feel the bone-deep fatigue settling into her muscles. The forest it is, she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Darius studied her for a long moment, then made a decision. Captain, make camp for the night. We'll enter Darkwood at first light when Lady Arya is rested. Your Majesty, with respect, every hour we delay gives the Shadow Court more time to organize, and every step we take with an exhausted moonwolf makes us more vulnerable, Darius cut him off. We camp tonight, post double watches, and set up protective wards around the perimeter. As the Royal Guard began setting up camp in a clearing beside the destroyed bridge, Darius helped Arya from the carriage. Her legs were shakier than she wanted to admit, and she was grateful for his steadying presence. Come, he said softly, leading her to a fallen log by the campfire one of his men had quickly built. Eat something, and then rest. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without you collapsing from exhaustion. The simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried meat tasted better than any feast to Arya's empty stomach. As she ate, she watched Darius move around the camp, checking defenses and speaking quietly with his men. Every gesture radiated competence and authority, yet he had been nothing but gentle and patient with her. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked, when he finally settled beside her on the log. I mean, I know we're mates, but you barely know me. For all you know, I could be completely useless in a real fight. Darius was quiet for so long that Arya thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. When I was a child, my grandmother used to tell me stories about the moon wolves, not just their power but their hearts. She said they were chosen by the goddess not for their strength, but for their capacity for love, sacrifice, and hope, even in the darkest times. He turned to look at her, his silver eyes reflecting the firelight. Tonight you could have fled when the shadow wolves attacked. You could have hidden and let others fight your battles. Instead, you stepped forward to protect people who had spent years treating you poorly. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Arya felt heat rise in her cheeks at his words. I couldn't stand seeing them hurt. Exactly, Darius said softly. That's what makes you worthy of the goddess's blessing, and that's what makes you worthy of being my queen. The title sent a shiver through Arya that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Queen, she repeated, as if testing how the word felt. I don't know the first thing about being royalty. You'll learn, Darius assured her. But more importantly, you'll teach the court what it means to lead with compassion instead of just power. They need that lesson. Before Arya could ask what he meant by that, Captain Thorne approached them with a concerned expression. Your Majesty, the scouts report movement in the forest. Nothing definite yet, but the shadows are restless. Darius stood immediately, his protective instincts flaring. How many men do we have on watch? 8 posted at all compass points around the camp. The wardstones are active, but they'll only hold against shadow creatures for so long if they're determined to break through. Then we'll have to be ready for them, Darius replied grimly. He looked down at Arya, his expression torn between the need to protect her and the practical reality of their situation. I need you to try to get some rest. If they attack tonight, we'll need your power again. Arya nodded, understanding the necessity, even as her stomach churned with anxiety. As she settled into the small tent the guards had erected for her, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of pine and rain like Darius himself, she tried to quiet her racing mind. Through the thin tent walls, she could hear the low murmur of the guards talking, the crackle of the fire, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of something that might have been wolves howling, or something pretending to be wolves. Sleep seemed impossible, but eventually exhaustion won out over fear, and Arya drifted into dreams filled with silver light and shadow beasts, unaware that just beyond the protective wards, red eyes watched and waited for their chance to strike. Chapter 6. Shadows in the dark. Arya jerked awake to the sound of shouting and the clash of metal on metal. For a disorienting moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then everything came rushing back. The attack at Silvermoon Pack, her awakening as the Moon Wolf, and their journey toward the capital. Stay in the tent! Darius's voice rang out over the sounds of battle, but Arya could hear the strain in it. Through the thin fabric walls, she could see the flickering shadows of combat illuminated by firelight, and something else, the sickly green glow that she now associated with shadow magic. She pressed herself against the tent wall, trying to see what was happening outside. The protective wards were holding, their silver light forming a shimmering dome over the campsite, but she could see dark shapes pressing against the barrier from all sides. More shadow wolves, and these looked different from the ones that had attacked the pack house. Larger, more solid, more organized. The wards are weakening, Captain Thorne shouted. Whatever's controlling these things is more powerful than the ones we faced before. Arya's blood ran cold as a familiar laugh echoed across the clearing. Not Malakar's voice, but something even more chilling. Female, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. Poor little king, the voice purred, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Did you really think you could spirit away our prize so easily? The Shadow Court has been planning this for centuries. We're not going to let one night's setback stop us. Through a gap in the tent flap, Arya saw her, a woman who might have been beautiful once, before the shadow magic had claimed her. Her hair was white as bone, her skin pale as moonlight, but her eyes burned with the same red fire as the shadow wolves. She wore robes that seemed to be cut from living darkness, and power radiated from her in waves that made the air itself seem to recoil. Lady Nerissa, Darius snarled, his sword blazing with silver light as he faced the shadow sorceress. I should have known you'd crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in. Oh, my dear Darius, Nerissa replied with mock affection. Still so hostile, and after all the history we share. Arya felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy at the familiarity in the shadow woman's tone, but she pushed it aside. Now wasn't the time for such petty emotions. That history ended the day you chose shadows over light, Darius replied coldly. You made your choice, Nerissa. Live with the consequences. Live? Nerissa laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Oh, darling, I stopped truly living years ago. Now I simply exist, sustained by power and the promise of revenge. Speaking of which," she raised her hand, and the shadow wolves pressed harder against the wards. Cracks began to appear in the silver dome, spreading like spider webs across its surface. "You have something that belongs to us," Nerissa continued conversationally. "The moon wolf's power should have been consumed generations ago. Her bloodline ended. But somehow, impossibly, one little pup managed to slip through our fingers." Her burning gaze found the tent where Arya was hidden. "Hello, little wolf. I can smell your fear from here." The wards shattered. Chaos erupted as shadow wolves poured into the camp from all sides. The royal guards fought valiantly, their silver-blessed weapons able to actually wound the shadow creatures, but they were vastly outnumbered. Arya watched in horror as one of the younger guards went down under 3 shadow wolves. His scream cut short in a way that made her stomach turn. Enough. The thought came from somewhere deep inside her, in a voice that was both her own and not her own. The same divine presence she had felt during the first battle settled around her like armor, but this time it felt different, more integrated, less like a separate entity, and more like a part of herself she was finally learning to access. Arya stepped out of the tent. "There she is," Nerissa purred, her red eyes lighting up with hunger. "The last moon wolf. You're even prettier than your mother was." "You knew my mother?" Arya asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Knew her? Darling, I'm the one who killed her." Nerissa's smile was sharp as a blade. "She fought beautifully, I'll give her that. But in the end, she was just one wolf against an entire army. She managed to birth you and hide you away before she died, but now you're here and the debt can finally be collected." Rage flooded through Arya, pure, cleansing fury that burned away her fear and uncertainty. Silver light began to pour from her skin, brighter than it had been during the first battle, more controlled but somehow more dangerous. "You killed my mother," she said, and her voice carried power now, the authority of someone who had finally accepted who she was meant to be. "I did," Nerissa confirmed, seemingly unconcerned by the growing light. "And now I'm going to kill you, absorb your power, and use it to—" She never finished the sentence. Arya's power exploded outward, but this time it wasn't wild or unfocused. It moved with purpose, seeking out every source of shadow magic in the clearing and burning it away like fire consuming dry tinder. The shadow wolves didn't even have time to scream before they were unmade, their forms dissolving back into the darkness from which they came. But Nerissa was stronger, more deeply connected to the shadow realm. The moonlight struck her like a physical blow, sending her staggering backward, but she remained corporeal. "Impressive," she gasped, her perfect composure cracking for the first time. "But raw power isn't everything, little wolf. Let me show you what centuries of experience can accomplish." She raised both hands, and darkness began to pour from her like smoke, not the simple shadow wolves from before, but something far more dangerous. The darkness took shape, a massive creature with too many teeth and eyes that burned like stars, a thing that shouldn't exist in the mortal realm. "A shadow demon," Captain Thorne breathed, his face pale with horror. "She's summoning a shadow demon." Darius moved to place himself between Arya and the emerging creature, but she caught his arm. "No," she said firmly. "This is my fight, my mother's killer, my responsibility." "Arya, trust me," she said, looking up into his silver eyes. "Please, trust me." After a moment that felt like eternity, Darius stepped aside. "I trust you," he said simply. Arya turned to face the shadow demon as it finished materializing, a creature of pure nightmare that stood twice as tall as any wolf and radiated malevolence like heat from a forge. Behind it, Nerissa smiled with triumph. "Meet my pet," she said sweetly. "I've been saving him for a special occasion." The demon lunged, moving with impossible speed for something so large. But Arya was ready. Instead of dodging or trying to blast it with moonlight, she did something unexpected. She opened herself completely to the moon goddess's power, not trying to control or direct it, but simply becoming a conduit for divine will. What happened next would be talked about in legends for generations to come. Arya began to glow, not just with silver light, but with something deeper, the pure, crystalline radiance of moonlight itself, untainted by shadow or doubt. The light didn't just pour from her. She became light, a figure of divine power that made the shadow demon recoil in terror. "Impossible," Nerissa whispered, her composure finally cracking completely. "No moonwolf has ever channeled that much power without burning out." "No moonwolf before her was the direct daughter of the goddess," a new voice said, warm and loving and infinitely ancient. The moon goddess herself stepped into the clearing, her form visible to mortal eyes for the first time in centuries. She looked exactly like Arya, but older, wiser, with eyes that held the wisdom of ages, and a smile that could heal wounded souls. "Mother," Arya whispered, understanding flooding through her. Not just the moonwolf bloodline. She was literally the daughter of a goddess. "Hello, my dear one," the moon goddess replied, her voice filled with love and pride. "You've done beautifully." Nerissa and her demon began backing away, but it was too late. The combined power of mother and daughter was beyond anything the shadow realm could withstand. With a gesture that was almost casual, the moon goddess unmade the shadow demon entirely, sending it back to whatever dark realm had spawned it. "And now," she said, turning her attention to Nerissa, "it's time to answer for your crimes." The shadow sorceress tried to run, tried to melt back into darkness, but there was nowhere to hide from the light of the moon goddess. In the end, she faced her destruction with a dignity she hadn't shown in life, standing straight and proud as divine judgment found her. "Tell me," the moon goddess asked almost conversationally, "was it worth it? All the power, all the hatred, all the centuries of emptiness?" Nerissa considered the question seriously, perhaps more seriously than she had considered anything in decades. "No," she finally admitted, "but I was too proud to stop, too far gone to turn back." "There is always a path back to the light," the moon goddess said gently, "but some choose not to take it. Rest now, child. Your torment is over." The light that claimed Nerissa was gentle, almost merciful, and when it faded, nothing remained but a sense of peace where terrible emptiness had been moments before. The moon goddess turned back to Arya, her expression soft with maternal love. "You've passed your first true test, daughter, but greater challenges lie ahead. Will you stay?" Arya asked, not ready to lose this connection to the mother she had never known. "Not in this form," the goddess replied, "but I am always with you in the moonlight, in your power, in the love that fills your heart. Remember that when the darkness seems overwhelming." She looked at Darius, who had been standing in respectful silence throughout the divine encounter. "Take care of my daughter, Alpha King. She will need your strength in the trials to come." "With my life," Darius vowed solemnly. The moon goddess smiled, and then she was gone, leaving only the normal moonlight and the memory of infinite love. Arya swayed on her feet, the divine power fading and leaving her more drained than ever. Darius caught her before she could fall, his strong arms supporting her weight. "The capital," she said weakly. "We need to reach the capital." "We will," Darius promised, holding her close. "But first you need to recover. That was extraordinary." As Arya drifted toward unconsciousness in her mate's protective embrace, she couldn't help but think that extraordinary was becoming her new normal, and they hadn't even reached the royal court yet. Chapter 7. The Royal Capital. 3 days after the battle with Lady Nerissa, the royal carriage finally crested the hill that revealed the capital city of Lunaris in all its magnificent glory. Arya pressed her face to the window, her breath catching at the sight spread before them. The city was built in concentric circles around a massive palace that seemed to be carved from moonstone itself, its towers reaching toward the sky like prayers made manifest. Silver banners fluttered from every building, and even from this distance, Arya could see wolves in both human and shifted forms, moving through the streets in perfect harmony. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then immediately felt foolish for stating something so obvious. "Wait until you see it at night," Darius said, his voice warm with affection for his home. "The entire palace glows with moonlight, not artificial light, but actual captured moonbeams that were blessed by your mother centuries ago. The effect is—" He paused, searching for words. "Well, you'll see." As their carriage made its way down the winding road toward the city gates, Arya noticed that crowds were beginning to gather. Word of the Alpha King's return, and more importantly of his mysterious mate, had clearly spread ahead of them. "Are they here to see me?" she asked nervously, watching as more and more wolves lined the streets. "Some are here out of curiosity," Darius admitted, "but most are here out of hope. It's been prophesied for generations that the return of the Moonwolf would herald a new age of peace and prosperity. You represent the answer to centuries of prayers. The weight of expectation settled on Arya's shoulders like a lead blanket. What if I disappoint them? What if I'm not what they're expecting? Darius reached across the carriage and took her hand, his fingers warm and reassuring around hers. You could never disappoint anyone who sees you as you truly are, but I won't lie to you. Court life will be challenging. There are those who will resent your sudden rise to power, others who will try to use you for their own ends, and some who will try to kill me, Arya added dryly, thinking of the Shadow Court. That too, Darius agreed grimly. But you won't face any of it alone. You have me, you have the Royal Guard, and you have power that even you don't fully understand yet. As they passed through the city gates, the crowds pressed closer, and Arya could hear their voices clearly now. Most were welcoming, calling out blessings and expressions of joy, but she caught fragments of other conversations that made her stomach clench. Just a common Omega from some backwater pack. Probably doesn't even know how to use a fork properly. The king should have chosen someone from a noble bloodline. Ignore them, Darius said firmly, having caught the same comments. Court gossips have nothing better to do than pick apart anyone new. Once they see what you're capable of, they'll change their tune quickly enough. The palace gates were even more impressive up close, towering silver structures inlaid with precious stones that formed intricate patterns depicting the phases of the moon. Guards in ceremonial armor lined their path, their faces respectfully blank but their eyes curious as they studied Arya. Inside the palace itself, Arya felt overwhelmed by the sheer opulence. Everything was silver and white and crystal, from the marble floors that reflected light like water, to the tapestries that seemed to move with their own inner luminescence. Servants bowed as they passed, but she caught the quickly concealed looks of surprise and assessment. "Your Majesty?" A cultured voice called out as they entered what appeared to be the main throne room. A tall, elegant woman approached them, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her dress clearly expensive. "Welcome home." "Lady Vivian," Darius replied, his tone polite but notably cooler than it had been when speaking to Arya. "Allow me to introduce my mate, Arya Moonwhisper. Arya, this is Lady Vivian Silverstone, my chief advisor." Lady Vivian's smile was perfect and completely false. "What a pleasant surprise," she said, her eyes taking in every detail of Arya's travel-worn appearance and simple dress. "We had heard rumors, of course, but one never knows what to believe." "The rumors are true," Darius said firmly. "Arya is the Moon Wolf, daughter of the Moon Goddess herself, and she will be crowned as my queen at the earliest possible opportunity." Something flickered behind Lady Vivian's eyes, anger perhaps, or calculation. "Of course, Your Majesty. I'm sure the court will be eager to welcome their new queen." The pause before eager was subtle but unmistakable. "I'm sure they will," Darius replied, his voice carrying a warning that only an idiot would miss. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Lady Arya needs to rest and recover from our journey." As they walked away, Arya could feel Lady Vivian's gaze boring into her back like a blade. "She doesn't like me," she murmured to Darius. "She doesn't like anyone who threatens her position of influence," Darius replied. "Vivian has been chief advisor since my father's time, and she's grown accustomed to being the most powerful woman in the kingdom. Your arrival changes the entire dynamic." He led her through a series of corridors that grew progressively more luxurious, finally stopping before a set of double doors carved with intricate moon and star patterns. "Your chambers," he said, pushing them open. Arya stepped inside and immediately felt overwhelmed. The suite was larger than her entire room at the pack house had been, decorated in shades of silver and pale blue that seemed to echo the colors of moonlight. Enormous windows looked out over the palace gardens, and a fire crackled warmly in a fireplace that could have housed a small dragon. "It's too much," she said weakly. "I don't belong in a place like this." "You belong wherever you choose to be," Darius said firmly. "But I understand this is overwhelming. The servants will bring you anything you need, food, clothes, whatever makes you comfortable. Rest, explore, get your bearings. Tomorrow we'll begin your formal training." "Training in what?" "Everything," Darius replied with a slight smile. "Court etiquette, politics, combat, power control, history. You need to become a queen in truth, not just in title. It won't be easy, but I have faith in you." After he left, Arya sank into one of the plush armchairs and tried to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, she had been nobody. Now she was expected to become the queen of the most powerful werewolf kingdom in existence. Master divine powers she barely understood, and somehow live up to centuries of prophecy and expectation. A soft knock at the door interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting a servant. Instead, a young woman about her own age entered, carrying what appeared to be an elaborate tea service. She had warm brown hair, kind eyes, and a smile that seemed genuine rather than calculated. "Your Majesty," she said, setting down the tea tray and offering a respectful curtsy. "I'm Maya, your new lady-in-waiting. Lady Vivian assigned me to help you adjust to court life." "Please just call me Arya," she replied, grateful for what seemed like the first genuinely friendly face she'd encountered since arriving. "Lady-in-waiting sounds so formal." Maya's smile brightened. "I'd be honored. And between you and me," she added in a conspiratorial whisper, "half the court is terrified of you, and the other half is placing bets on how long it'll take before someone tries to challenge your position." "That's not particularly reassuring," Arya said dryly. "Oh, it should be," Maya replied cheerfully, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "It means they all recognize that you're important. The question is whether they'll try to use you, eliminate you, or actually support you. And which category do you fall into?" Maya's expression grew serious. "Support, absolutely. I was there when the moonlight itself announced your arrival 3 nights ago. Every wolf in the kingdom felt it, a surge of power and hope that we haven't experienced in generations. You're exactly what we need, even if you don't realize it yet." For the first time since arriving at the palace, Arya felt a spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Chapter 8. Lessons in Power. Arya's first week at the royal palace was a whirlwind of lessons, meetings, and barely controlled chaos. Every morning began with etiquette training from a stern woman called Madame Cordelia, who seemed to take personal offense at Arya's table manners and speaking patterns. "Her queen does not slouch," Madame Cordelia would say, rapping Arya's shoulders with a silver rod. "A queen does not speak before being spoken to by visiting dignitaries. A queen does whatever is necessary to serve her people." Arya finally snapped on the 4th day, her patience finally exhausted. "And if that means slouching occasionally or speaking out of turn, then so be it." Madame Cordelia looked scandalized, but Maya, who was always present during these sessions, hid a smile behind her hand. The afternoons were dedicated to combat training with Captain Thorne and some of the Royal Guard's finest warriors. This, at least, Arya found more enjoyable, even though she was starting from absolute scratch. "Your power is your greatest weapon," Captain Thorne explained, as they worked through basic sword forms in the palace's training courtyard. "But you can't rely on it exclusively. There will be times when you need to fight without magic, and more importantly, understanding physical combat will make your magical abilities more precise." Arya was terrible at first. Her small frame and complete lack of experience made her an easy target for even the youngest trainees. But something about the rhythm of combat, the dance-like flow of attack and defense, spoke to something deep inside her. By the end of the week, she was managing to hold her own for several minutes before being disarmed. The evenings were reserved for the most challenging lessons of all, learning to control her moon wolf powers. Darius personally oversaw these sessions, leading her to a private chamber deep within the palace that had been specifically designed for magical training. "The key," he explained on their first evening, "is not to fight the power, but to work with it. Think of it as a river. You can't stop a river, but you can direct its flow." Easier said than done. Arya's power seemed to have a mind of its own, surging forth when she was emotional or stressed, but refusing to respond when she tried to call it deliberately. More than once she accidentally melted training equipment or sent out pulses of energy that knocked everyone in the room off their feet. "I'm hopeless," she said after a particularly frustrating session where she'd been trying to create a simple ball of moonlight for over an hour. "Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." "You're not hopeless," Darius said firmly, moving to stand behind her. "You're impatient. Here, let me help." He placed his hands over hers, his warmth and strength surrounding her like a protective cocoon. "Close your eyes," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Don't think about creating light. Think about why you want to create it." "I don't understand." "Your power isn't just raw energy. It's tied to your emotions, your intentions. The moon goddess blessed your bloodline with power specifically to protect and heal. So instead of thinking, 'I want to make light,' think about what that light could do. Who could it help? What darkness could it banish?" Arya closed her eyes and tried to follow his advice. Instead of focusing on the mechanics of her power, she thought about her pack. Elena's worried face, the younger wolves who had looked up to her even when everyone else dismissed her, the fear in the royal servants' eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. Warmth bloomed in her chest, spreading down her arms to her hands. When she opened her eyes, a perfect sphere of soft silver light was floating between her palms, steady and controlled. "There," Darius said softly, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "You see, you just needed to remember why you were fighting." The moment would have been perfect, if not for the slow clap that echoed from the doorway. They turned to see Lady Vivian standing there, her expression unreadable. "How touching," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I do hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Lady Vivian," Darius replied coolly, not moving away from Arya. "What brings you to the training chambers?" "Court business, I'm afraid. There are several matters that require your immediate attention: trade disputes, border tensions with the Eastern Pacts, and most urgently, the formal announcement of your engagement." Arya felt Darius tense beside her. "What about the announcement?" "The noble families are growing. Restless," Lady Vivian replied delicately. "Many of them had daughters they hoped you might consider as potential mates. They're not entirely pleased to discover that you've chosen an Omega from an obscure pack, regardless of her unique abilities." "My choice is not subject to their approval," Darius said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an Alpha King. "Of course not, Your Majesty, but politics requires a certain degree of finesse. Perhaps it would be wise to hold a formal reception, allow the court to meet Lady Arya properly, see her demonstrate her abilities. It might help smooth over some of the resistance." Arya could see the trap even if Darius couldn't. A formal reception would put her on display like a prize animal, allowing the noble families to scrutinize her every word and gesture, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. "That sounds like an excellent idea," she said before Darius could object. "When would you suggest we hold it?" Lady Vivian's eyes sharpened with interest. "Tomorrow evening would be ideal. That would give us time to send proper invitations and prepare the Great Hall." "Tomorrow?" Darius frowned. "That seems rushed. Arya isn't ready." "I'm ready," Arya interrupted, meeting Lady Vivian's calculating gaze steadily. "After all, if I'm going to be queen, I'll need to face the court eventually. Better to do it on our terms than theirs." Something that might have been approval flickered in Lady Vivian's eyes. "Very wise, Your Majesty. I'll begin the preparations immediately." After she left, Darius turned to Arya with concern written across his features. "Are you sure about this? Vivian is playing some kind of game, and I don't want you to be her pawn." "I'm not her pawn," Arya replied firmly. "But she's right about one thing. I need to establish myself with the court. Running away or hiding will only make them think I'm weak." "You're not weak," Darius said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "You're the strongest person I've ever met." Arya allowed herself a moment to lean into his strength, breathing in his scent of pine and rain and wild storms. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger every day, making her hyper-aware of his every emotion. "I love you," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Darius went very still. "What did you say?" Heat flooded Arya's cheeks as she realized what she'd admitted. I said I love you. I know it's probably too soon, and we barely know each other, but the mate bond and everything we've been through together," and he silenced her with a kiss, his lips warm and demanding against hers. When they finally broke apart, his silver eyes were blazing with emotion. "I love you too," he said simply. "I think I've been falling for you since the moment I saw you hiding behind that tree at the pack ceremony. Really, really. You were so brave, even when you thought you had nothing to be brave with, and now—" He traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "Now you're about to face down an entire court of wolves who would love nothing more than to tear you apart. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Arya thought about everything she'd learned over the past week, the combat training, the etiquette lessons, the growing control over her power. More importantly, she thought about who she'd been a week ago versus who she was becoming. "No," she said honestly, "I'm not ready, but I'm going to do it anyway." Darius smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "That's my queen." Tomorrow night would bring new challenges, new enemies, and new tests of her worthiness to wear a crown. But for now, wrapped in the arms of the man she loved, and finally beginning to understand her own power, Arya felt ready to face whatever the court could throw at her. She just hoped she was right. Chapter 9. Trial by Fire. The great hall had been transformed for the formal reception, its already impressive grandeur elevated to breathtaking heights. Thousands of moonflowers, rare blooms that only opened under lunar light, cascaded from the ceiling in shimmering curtains, while crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the marble floors. The assembled noble families stood in elegant clusters throughout the space, their conversations a constant hum of barely contained curiosity and judgment. Arya stood before her full-length mirror, trying to calm her racing heart as Maya made final adjustments to her gown. The dress was a masterpiece of silver silk and moonstone embroidery that seemed to capture and reflect light with every breath she took. It was beautiful, regal, and completely unlike anything she had ever imagined wearing. "You look like a goddess," Maya said softly, stepping back to admire their work. "The court won't know what hit them." "That's what I'm afraid of," Arya murmured, her hands trembling slightly as she touched the delicate silver crown that Darius had insisted she wear. Not his mother's heavy, formal crown, but a simpler circlet that seemed to be woven from captured starlight. A soft knock at the door announced Darius's arrival. He entered looking devastatingly handsome in formal black and silver, but his eyes were only for her. "You're magnificent," he breathed, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "Are you ready?" "No," Arya replied honestly, "but let's do this anyway." The moment they appeared at the top of the grand staircase, the entire hall fell silent. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward them, studying, evaluating, judging. Arya forced herself to keep her chin high and her steps steady as they descended, even though she felt like she was walking into a den of hungry wolves. "Their Majesties, Alpha King Darius and Lady Arya Moonwhisper," the herald announced, his voice carrying easily across the vast space. The first part of the evening proceeded smoothly enough. Darius guided her through introductions to various noble families, each interaction a careful dance of diplomacy and veiled threats. Most were polite to her face while making it clear through subtle gestures and tone that they considered her beneath their notice. A few were openly hostile. "Lady Arya," said Duchess Rosalind Blackmore, a woman whose beauty was as sharp as her reputation for cruelty, "how unique to have someone from such a humble background join our little circle. I do hope you're not finding court life too overwhelming." The words were innocent enough, but the tone made it clear she hoped for exactly the opposite. "Not at all, Your Grace," Arya replied smoothly, drawing on weeks of etiquette training. "I find that a humble background gives one a better appreciation for the responsibilities that come with privilege." A few nearby nobles murmured appreciatively at the subtle rebuke, but Duchess Blackmore's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Indeed. Though I wonder if someone without proper breeding can truly understand the weight of royal duty. After all, being queen requires more than just unusual abilities." The challenge was unmistakable now, and Arya could feel the attention of the entire hall focusing on their conversation. This was the moment Lady Vivian had orchestrated, the test that would determine whether Arya could hold her own against the court's most formidable adversaries. "You're absolutely right," Arya agreed, her voice carrying just enough power to make the Duchess take an involuntary step backward. "Being queen requires strength, wisdom, compassion, and the ability to protect one's people from any threat, internal or external." She let a hint of silver light flicker in her eyes, just enough to remind everyone exactly what they were dealing with. "But most importantly," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "it requires the blessing of the moon goddess herself, and I think we all know where her favor lies." Before Duchess Blackmore could respond, the great hall's doors burst open with a crash that sent several nobles scrambling for cover. Dark figures poured through the opening, not shadow wolves this time, but actual werewolves whose eyes burned with unnatural red fire. "The Shadow Court," Darius snarled, immediately moving to protect Arya. "How did they get past the wards?" His question was answered when Lady Vivian stepped forward, her elegant facade melting away to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. "Because they had inside help," she said calmly, raising her hand to reveal a pendant that pulsed with dark energy. "Did you really think I would stand by and watch some backwater Omega take everything I've worked for?" "Vivienne," Darius breathed, his voice filled with betrayal and rage. "You've been working with them all along." "For years," she confirmed, "ever since they promised to make me the power behind the throne once they eliminated the royal bloodline. Of course, that was before we learned about your little mate's true nature. Now the plan has changed somewhat." The shadow-corrupted wolves spread throughout the hall, herding the terrified nobles into the center of the room. Arya could see the fear in their eyes. These were not warriors but courtiers, politicians and socialites, who had never faced real danger in their pampered lives. "What do you want?" Darius demanded, his hand moving to his sword. "Simple," Lady Vivian replied. "Your mate comes with us willingly, and we'll let the rest of these people live. Refuse, and we'll paint these pretty walls with noble blood." "Never," Darius growled. "I thought you might say that." Lady Vivian's smile was sharp as a blade. "Which is why I brought insurance." She gestured, and more shadow wolves entered the hall, these dragging, struggling prisoners behind them. Arya's heart nearly stopped when she recognized them: Elena, Elder Moonwhisper, and several other members of the Silver Moon Pack, all bound with chains that glowed with sickly green light. "You're friends from home," Lady Vivian said conversationally. "Amazing how easy it was to take them once we knew where to look. Surrender yourself and they go free. Resist and they die first, slowly, while you watch." Arya felt something break inside her chest, not her spirit, but the last chains that had been holding back her true power. The shy, frightened Omega, who had hidden behind trees and accepted every cruel word, was gone, replaced by someone who would burn the world down before letting innocent people suffer for her sake. "You made one mistake," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent hall. "Oh? And what's that?" Arya smiled, and silver fire began to dance around her fingers. "You assumed I still cared about my own safety, more than protecting the people I love." The power that erupted from her was unlike anything she had displayed before, not just light, but pure divine wrath made manifest. It poured from her like a tsunami of liquid starlight, washing over the shadow wolves and their corrupted allies. But this time, Arya had perfect control. The light was selective, discriminating, flowing around the innocent nobles and prisoners while consuming the shadow creatures entirely. The corrupted wolves didn't even have time to scream before they were unmade, their stolen power returning to the void from which it came. Lady Vivian staggered backward, her protective pendant cracking under the assault of divine energy. "Impossible," she gasped. "No one has that much power." "I am the daughter of the moon goddess," Arya replied, advancing on the treacherous advisor with steady, implacable steps. "I am the guardian of the balance, the protector of the innocent, and the rightful queen of this realm. And you have threatened my family." The silver light around her coalesced into something almost solid, wings of pure radiance that spread behind her like those of some avenging angel. Every person in the hall fell to their knees instinctively, recognizing the divine authority she now embodied. "Please," Lady Vivian begged, all her elegant composure finally cracking. I only wanted—" "I know what you wanted," Arya said, not without compassion. "Power, respect, a place in the world that felt worthy of you. But you chose the wrong path to achieve it." She raised her hand, silver fire dancing around her fingers, and Lady Vivian closed her eyes in preparation for destruction. Instead, Arya placed her palm gently on the woman's forehead. The light that flowed from her touch was warm, healing, cleansing the shadow corruption from Lady Vivian's soul without destroying her. When the light faded, Lady Vivian collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she truly saw what she had become for the first time in years. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. What have I done?" "You lost your way," Arya replied gently. "But that doesn't mean you can't find it again." She turned to address the assembled court, her voice carrying to every corner of the great hall. "Let this be a lesson to all of us. Power without compassion becomes corruption. Ambition without love becomes destruction. We are stronger when we stand together than when we tear each other apart." The silver wings faded as her power settled back to manageable levels, but the crown on her head now blazed with its own inner light, a sign that the moon goddess had formally acknowledged her daughter's ascension. Darius moved to her side, his eyes blazing with love and pride. "My queen," he said formally, then leaned close to whisper, "That was incredible. You were incredible." Around them, the noble families began to rise from their knees, their expressions transformed from skepticism to awe. Whatever doubts they might have had about her worthiness to rule had been thoroughly dispelled. "Your Majesty," Duchess Blackmore said, approaching with genuine respect for the first time that evening, "I owe you an apology. I misjudged you completely." "We all make mistakes," Arya replied graciously. What matters is that we learn from them. As the evening continued, the atmosphere in the hall was completely transformed. The nobles who had dismissed her hours earlier now competed for her attention, eager to earn the favor of someone who commanded such obvious divine blessing. But more importantly, Arya could see something else in their eyes: hope. For the first time in generations, they had a queen who truly understood what it meant to serve her people rather than simply ruling them. Chapter 10. Crown of Moonlight. 1 month later, Arya stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun set over the capital city of Lunaris. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of preparations for the formal coronation ceremony, and tomorrow night, under the light of the full moon, she would officially become queen. The thought still seemed surreal. "Having second thoughts?" Darius asked, joining her at the balcony railing and slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Every day," she admitted, leaning back against his solid warmth. "But not about this, not about us." "Good," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Because I have something for you." He pulled back and presented her with a small velvet box. It's tradition for the Alpha King to give his mate a coronation gift, something that symbolizes their bond and their commitment to ruling together. Arya opened the box and gasped. Inside was a ring unlike anything she had ever seen, a band of what looked like captured moonlight, holding a stone that seemed to contain an entire galaxy of stars. "It belonged to the first moon wolf," Darius explained, as he slipped it onto her finger. "The one who founded this kingdom alongside the first Alpha King. It's been waiting centuries for its rightful owner." The ring fit perfectly, and the moment it settled into place, Arya felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the metal against her skin. It was as if the spirits of all the moon wolves who had come before were welcoming her into their legacy. "Thank you," she whispered, then stood on her toes to kiss him properly. "I love you." "And I love you," he replied against her lips. "More than I ever thought possible." A gentle cough from the doorway interrupted their moment. Maya stood there with an amused expression, carrying what appeared to be the evening's correspondence. "Sorry to interrupt," she said with a grin that suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "But there are some letters that require your immediate attention." Arya accepted the small stack of envelopes, noting the various pack seals and noble crests. Most were congratulations on her upcoming coronation, but one caught her attention immediately: the familiar mark of the Silvermoon pack. She opened it eagerly, her face lighting up as she read the contents. "They're all coming," she said excitedly. "Elena, Elder Moon Whisper, even Alpha Marcus and Luna Sarah. They'll be here for the coronation." "I told you they would," Darius said warmly. "Despite everything that happened, you're still family to them." Another letter bore the seal of the Eastern Pax, and Arya opened it with curiosity. What she read made her sit down abruptly. "What is it?" Darius asked, immediately concerned. "It's from Alpha Kieran of the Eastern Pax," she said slowly. He says that since news of my awakening spread, other wolves have been manifesting unusual abilities. Wolves who can see the future, wolves who can heal with a touch, wolves who can speak with the spirits of the forest." Darius frowned thoughtfully. The return of the moon wolf was prophesied to herald a new age. Perhaps this is what that meant. Not just your awakening, but the awakening of abilities that have been dormant for generations. Which means more wolves who need training, protection, guidance, Arya mused. "This is bigger than just our kingdom, isn't it?" "Much bigger," Darius agreed, "but we'll face it together just like everything else." The next evening, the Great Hall was transformed once again, this time for the coronation ceremony. Representatives from every pack in the known world had come to witness the historic event, and the hall blazed with silver light and flickering candles. Arya walked down the aisle in a gown that seemed to be woven from moonbeams themselves, her steps steady and sure despite the magnitude of the moment. At the altar waited the high priestess of the moon goddess, an ancient woman whose blind eyes nevertheless seemed to see everything. "Kneel, child," the high priestess commanded in a voice that carried the weight of centuries. Arya knelt before the altar, her head bowed respectfully as the ancient ritual began. The high priestess spoke in the old tongue, words of binding and blessing that echoed through the hall with power that made the very air shimmer. "Do you, Arya Moon Whisper, daughter of the moon goddess, swear to protect and serve the people of this realm with wisdom, compassion, and strength?" "I do," Arya replied, her voice carrying clearly throughout the hall. Do you swear to stand as guardian against the darkness, to be a light in the shadows, and to never forget that true power comes from love, not fear? I do. Then rise, Queen Arya, and receive your crown. Arya stood as the High Priestess lifted the Queen's crown from its velvet cushion. Unlike the simple circlet she had worn before, this was the true crown of Lunaris, a masterpiece of silver and moonstone that had been blessed by the moon goddess herself centuries ago. The moment the crown touched her head, power flooded through her, not just her own abilities, but the combined strength of every queen who had worn it before her. She gasped as visions flashed through her mind, the kingdom's history, the challenges to come, and the golden thread of destiny that connected past, present, and future. "All hail, Queen Arya," Darius called out, his voice filled with pride and love. "All hail, Queen Arya," the assembled crowd responded, their voices rising to the rafters in a sound that shook the very foundations of the palace. As the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Arya found herself surrounded by well-wishers and dignitaries, but her eyes kept seeking out familiar faces in the crowd. Elena was there, beaming with pride, along with Elder Moonwhisper and many others from the Silver Moon Pack. Even Alpha Marcus approached her with genuine respect, and what might have been a hint of paternal pride. "You've exceeded every expectation," he said formally. "The Pack is honored to have contributed to your story." "The Pack gave me everything I needed to become who I was meant to be," Arya replied graciously. "Even the difficult times were necessary. They taught me strength, resilience, and the value of true friendship." Later that night, after the last guest had departed and the palace had settled into peaceful quiet, Arya and Darius stood together on the highest tower of the palace, looking out over their kingdom. "Any regrets?" Darius asked, slipping his arms around her from behind. Arya considered the question seriously. A month ago she had been nobody, a broken Omega whom everyone dismissed as worthless. Now she wore a crown and commanded powers that most people couldn't even imagine. The shy, frightened girl was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to embrace her destiny. "None," she said finally. "This is where I belong, with you, with our people, facing whatever challenges come next." "Good," Darius murmured, nuzzling her neck. "Because there's one more tradition we need to observe." "Which is?" "The marriage ceremony," he said with a grin she could hear in his voice. "You didn't think I'd let you be crowned without making sure you couldn't escape me, did you?" Arya laughed, the sound light and joyous in the moonlit air. "I wouldn't dream of escaping you. You're stuck with me, Alpha King. Forever and always," he agreed, turning her in his arms so he could kiss her properly. Above them, the full moon blazed with silver light, and for just a moment Arya could have sworn she heard her divine mother's voice carried on the night wind. "Well done, my daughter. Your true adventure is just beginning." As she kissed her mate beneath the moon's blessing, surrounded by the kingdom they would rule together, Arya knew that the moon goddess was right. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her, but for all the supernatural creatures who would look to her for guidance in the age to come. She had been too weak to be an alpha's mate, according to those who judged by appearances, but she had never been weak. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal her true strength. Now, crowned as queen and surrounded by love, Arya Moonwhisper was exactly where she belonged, ready to face the future with power, wisdom, and most importantly, hope.